Welcome to Capital Connections. Capital is one of the UK's first people-led mental health organisations. For over 28 years, we have brought together people with services and professionals to improve support, influence design and deliver training shaped by real experience. We are an independent peer-led charity with more than 300 members. Our work is led by people with lived experience through shared learning, workshops, training, community spaces and independent forums. From leading peer-led services to establishing an independent lived experience advisory group for West Sussex, to gathering the voices of people affected by addiction through the West Sussex Drug and Alcohol Partnership, our role is consistent, ensuring lived experience informs decisions at every level. This podcast explores health and well-being in Sussex through real stories, insight and reflection, giving space to lived experience voices. This is Capital Connections.
Right, so hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Dan Barritt, Public Health Lead for Substance Use, West Sussex County Council, and Robert Whitehead, Public Principal Research Officer for West Sussex County Council. So first of all, we're going to come to you, Rob, I think. So what was the thinking behind the community fund?
Hello, well, thank you. The main thinking was that we had an opportunity after working with Capital previously that highlighted a need for co-production initiatives in order to inform some of our practices within the Drug and Alcohol Partnership. Now, that presented a great requirement, but we also had an opportunity with available funds, and putting an opportunity together with a requirement, it meant that we could finally say to the senior leadership, let's go for this, let's really try and nail a solid attempt at co-production of a community fund. So we wanted to be able to take these public monies and actually put them in the hands of the public, of people who had lived and living experience. And that would mean, hopefully, that we'd be adhering to those principles of co-production, which I can discuss shortly. That would give us the best opportunity to use the public money through the lens of what people really needed and really wanted in order to improve some of the outcomes which we had already agreed on as priorities. So thinking behind that being, if we can get this money out to people with lived and living experience, then they would be able to come up with the best possible plans, the best possible ideas, and really lead on some of those activities. Now, there are some other things underneath that, because of course there's some theory behind co-production. These are things that we're very interested in and very anxious to analyze and evaluate, and that's that there's two different types of benefits really. There's instrumental benefits, so that's the use of people's experience and expertise and how that contributes to a more efficient use of resources. But then there's also intrinsic benefits, so that's the increased sense of social responsibility, of citizenship, of benefits to the wider community, and improved health and well-being of those taking part. So putting all of that together, we wanted to be able to run this model and really test if this was a practical, real solution to improving outcomes in the community, as well as demonstrating that we could really do co-production in that classic sense, rather than just falling back on some engagements and workshops, which tends to be the case in some instances.
I couldn't agree more, and it's amazing co-production that's gone on throughout this project. And I think Dan wanted to come in there a bit.
Yeah, it was just to reflect that not only is this a sort of local priority that we identified as a partnership, but it's also a national directive as well. So when the National Drug Strategy was published and guidance for local delivery partners followed, involvement of people with lived and living experience of substance-related harm is central within that guidance. So it's recognised as very, very valuable in the area of drug and alcohol support and recovery. So not only was it a local priority, as Rob described, and against all the principles that he outlined, but it's also a national directive. So we wanted to demonstrate at a national and regional level that this work is difficult, it takes time, there's a lot of ambiguity around it, but it is worth investing in because it produces incredible outcomes.
Thank you so much. So what challenges or gaps were you hoping it would address, Rob?
Well, there was on the one side, there's the Drug and Alcohol Partnership, which has a whole framework of evidence-based priorities in the community. They look at issues around children and young people with a lot of prevention work and work around schools and gang vi gang-related violence and county lines exploitation, etc. There's the criminal justice angle of trying to reduce the harms of the drug supply chain and drug-related crimes in the area. There's improving drug and alcohol related treatment outcomes. And then there's all of the other wider determinants of health, which can include housing and employment and other related social issues. And all of those come together to give us an idea of this matrix that we can try and improve on any different level. But what we were trying to do in this particular instance was see what people in the community were trying to focus on. So we can have our list of priorities, but that doesn't mean that's what other people care about. And by putting the public money into the hands of the people with lived and living experience, that should give them the choice to say, well, you can have all of these different priorities, but we would really like to focus on this because it's something that's been bugging us personally for a long time. We'd like to invest in a solution. We'd like to really throw ourselves at it. And now that there's funds to do so, we'd like to take this away. And that's really where the ethos of the program comes from, not with us trying to dictate priorities and trying to commission solutions, but trying to show people where the evidence lies and then allow them to come up with their own decisions for what they want to do and in the way that they want to do it. Now, there were particular challenges in setting all of that up, particularly around co-production, being that it's not a commonly used method to do it in this way. A lot of co-production talks about co-production in research or co-production in engagement or maybe a specific service design, but rarely does it actually point to an entire program of work or an entire system. And that's the extra level that we're trying to do, because we can't say we want to do exactly X. How should we do it? We want to say we have a whole battery of social priorities that we want to look towards. So what is it exactly that you would like to do, and how do you think we can solve it together? So we can provide on our side the funding in this instance, but we can also provide some of the training around how to think about projects and outcomes and impacts. And we can also provide guidance around ethical issues or around access to participants if you're doing it in that way, or any other particular technical components. But we really leave it up to the individuals and the project leads to come up with their solutions and to really roll that out as they would like. So something that we needed to do was to come together to create an evaluation framework for this particular model. And that meant going right back to the basics, looking at the principles, because there's a whole number of things that co-production is supposed to do. And that's what we really wanted to measure is, have we done co-production well, and can we demonstrate the positive impacts of that? And if I list these off, we have 1, recognizing people as assets in their own right. 2, building on people's existing capabilities. 3, developing two-way reciprocal relationships. 4, encouraging peer support networks. 5, blurring boundaries between delivering and receiving services. And 6, facilitating activities, not delivering to people. So we had to think in the long term. We had to set up all of our processes in order to look at those and always keep them in mind. And it was a challenge for us to keep those things in mind. Things around trust. We had to be able to trust that the process, if given room to breathe, would produce results. And if we came in as top-down commissioners, we would end up squashing some of that enthusiasm. We would squash the innovation, and we had to really let things flourish, let the garden grow. So that was some of the challenges on our side in particular. But I think we've been reasonably successful in that, whilst we've held back and allowed people to come up with their own ideas and really drive from their own passions, the projects have come up wonderfully, and we've seen a lot of success and a lot of wonderful creativity, some things that we would have never thought of, some things we would have never thought possible, and it's all been delivered in spectacular fashion by some of these project leads. So it really shows that that is where the power lies. If you can organize a support system and a network which can carry the main body of the work to keep everyone on track, then they will be free to actually focus on what's important to them in improving some of these outcomes.
That's amazing. I think that's so true. I think supporting people to allow them to be free is like what it's, it's really been about in this project. People have really said to me they felt really supportive. They felt that they can be creative. They felt safe. That's something they're trusting. There's so many things that have come up for people. Confidence building, being able to lead projects, so many things that they wouldn't have had the opportunities to do without the support they've received. So that's amazing. Thanks, Rob. What advice would you give to other councils considering something similar?
Yeah, there's a whole load of interesting things that we've pulled out of this, and this allows us to speak quite freely about it because we've been very excited, firstly, from being given the opportunity to test this model, but then also from seeing how many positive things can come out of it. So it's really, it would be good for us to be able to sing this praises quite widely and how well it's run. So some of those pieces of advice would be, firstly, trust is very important, and not in trusting people and them trusting us, but in trusting the process. If you really believe in some of these textbook terminologies, do you as a commissioning lead or as a managing department head, do you really believe the idea of co-production? And do you really trust that if you let it go and let it grow, that it will actually be okay? You have to maintain some of your ethical oversights. You have to be able to keep an eye on things. If you're holding accountability for spend of public funds in the public arena, that's fair. But you do have to trust that sometimes people might come up with a weird idea that you weren't expecting, or it might be something that you're not personally comfortable in your own personal headspace, but actually it'll be fine because there's a recognized need out there from the people who've lived a living experience. So have faith in your own words, have faith in the textbook definition. That's the first piece of advice. The second would be that it is important to have something like the capital model that we were using in this instance. That's where you have an organization, lived experience recovery organization is a term that's used, but a body out there, whether it's a charity or a registered community group, that can actually oversee this process, because it's very labor intensive and you would need to recruit 2, maybe 3 people to work on it full time in order to get it up and running and get it moving if you were doing it internally. And that, of course, creates its own baggage for the HR process and the management line. So being able to commission out to have someone oversee that process alleviates a lot of that burden, a lot of stress, and it becomes more of a contract management and communication workload on the authority rather than having to manage an entire process like this. Because what Capital's been able to do is really hold a lot of that stress. They've been holding a lot of the dialogue and the conversations. They've been holding a lot of issues where if there are any slips or lapses from individuals running their individual projects, then Capital's been there to really take care of people and support them, which is something that authorities aren't necessarily trained to do, and they're not necessarily experienced in doing, in really supporting people in a vulnerable position in their lives. So that would be the second piece of advice, that it is good to commission outwards rather than trying to hold that onto yourself. And I think the third piece would be that it really is beneficial to let it go in this way and run a completely outsourced co-production model as opposed to a community grant system where it is held internally, by giving the opportunity to the people that are running this to actually run the projects and to run the system. You don't have to be a top-down bureaucratic manager. So there's an alternative model of community grants where we will hold, for example, £100,000 or £50,000 and say organisations may approach us and put in a bid, and if we like their bid, we'll release money to them, and they go off with very little support. We simply say, here's your grant, good luck. But by outsourcing, you allow the support structures to exist, which would give people additional opportunities to really see the benefits of the co-production elements not just in freeing up the contracts and the commissioning and the management side, which I spoke of a minute ago, but in allowing all of the empowerment side. That being a core tenet of co-production, that there are intrinsic benefits to doing it this way, and that is to empower people, to give them the experience of running it, to give them the experience of project leads. And we've seen a lot of that very positive reflection from people that have taken part.
Thanks, Rob. That's some great advice. And I'm going to go over to Dan. Dan, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Mine's a bit more generic. I would say be honest and be courageous and invest in partnerships and measure yourself against those principles of co-production that you're building the work on in the first place. That has been a real success, I think, of this program. Although the work's been commissioned out, we've commissioned capital. Those very principles of co-production have been involved in all of our engagement and activity and partnership working along the journey. And I think that has really laid the foundation to achieve some of the things we have. And that has required a great deal of honesty from everybody, a lot of reflection and a lot of courage, because there's been a lot of uncertainty, there's been a lot of challenges on both sides, there's been difficulty. So being honest and going back to those principles of co-production, always at every stage, not just in a planning and designing and then evaluating, but at every single stage is vitally important, but very, very worthwhile.
Thanks, Dan. Very true. I'm going to start talking a little bit about the trauma-informed substance use training with Alcohol Change UK. So I'm going to come to you, Dan. What was the thinking behind supporting that with this work?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we know that there's so much evidence that shows that traumatic events and circumstances and backgrounds massively increase the risk of developing a substance use dependency or harmful patterns of drug and alcohol use. And we know that combined with that, people who are dependent on drugs and alcohol often face mistreatment, sort of stereotyping, negative bias from society, including within support settings, health and social care settings, criminal justice settings, and others. And this is a massive barrier to people seeking support. So we know that nationally, the evidence tells us that. But, it was a theme that also came through loud and clear from the insight reports that Capital undertook on behalf of the Drug and Alcohol Partnership. People did describe childhood and adult trauma as a catalyst for their dependency. A real advantage across the local system is that there is an awful lot of awareness and recognition and understanding of the absolute necessity of trauma-informed practice. And that's at a kind of, NHS system leadership level, all the way down to individual, smaller voluntary sector organisation level too. So there's a great deal of awareness around trauma-informed approaches, trauma-informed practice, and that's fantastic. Trauma-informed leadership too. I think the reason we wanted to co-produce some trauma-informed training between Alcohol Change UK and Capital is to really contextualise it and focus on drug and alcohol use and dependence, because there are those layers of stigma within. So you can have a trauma-informed approach, but there can still be stigma and shame around drug and alcohol dependence. We wanted to really contextualise that approach and support public-facing professionals to understand those relationships and, more importantly, develop the skills to apply that knowledge and understanding to treat people more with dignity and respect, and to help them access the support that they need when they need it. But of course, trauma-informed practice, just at the theoretical level, is difficult. And rarely when stuff is just at the theoretical level does it lead to a change in behaviours and practices. So we really wanted to make this training real by co-producing and co-designing the content from people with lived experience, but also to embed that within the delivery of the training itself. And that made the training really, really contextually real and beneficial, having that Q&A portion in the session, having input from people with lived experience of trauma and drug and alcohol dependence, really brought together the principles and help people understand how they can be better supported through their own practice.
Thanks, Dan. You've already answered this really, I guess, but from your perspective, why is trauma-informed practice important for professionals working with people affected by drug and or alcohol harm?
Yeah, that contextual understanding is really, really important. So important. There's so much conscious and unconscious bias where people with drug and alcohol dependence and use of substances is concerned. There still can be pervasive kind of moral judgments of people that are dependent on substances, which can really come through in interactions with wider public support services. So, you know, not just in health and care treatment settings, for example, but across the board, Job Centre Plus staff, public services like transport and banks, shops, etc. But, you know, support services, criminal justice services, drug and alcohol treatment services even. There is a strong sort of conditioning bias where drug and alcohol use is concerned. And we know that trauma is a huge catalyst and driver of dependence. So really understanding the shame and the stigma that is felt and lived and experienced by people that use drugs and alcohol is really, really important in the context of trauma-informed approaches. It needs to be understood, to be addressed, and to be overcome. So that's why it's vital. It's vital to understand drug and alcohol dependence alongside trauma-informed approaches in order to help people overcome the shame and stigma of their addictions and for other people to not address them with shame and stigma also. So in terms of the training, having that voice, the stories of people, the voice of people with lived experience in relation to the concepts that we cover in the training and the supporting materials is so valuable and so necessary.
I think it's worked really well, and I've been on the receiving end of that shame and stigma, and it actually really halts your recovery when you're feeling you're in that yourself and you're feeling it from others. You know, if you don't have any kindness or compassion coming your way, it takes a lot longer to recover. So it's so important, and it's like we say, it's what people asked for, and it's gone out to a really wide range of staff, hasn't it, across West Sussex. So, and I've heard some of the feedback, and it has been really good. I think having that lived experience element makes it really real for people. So that's great. So any final comments, I guess, from either of you?
It's hard to describe it in a sort of semi-formal way, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
I guess it's like co-production in general. It's so difficult to sort of capture the essence, really, of the benefits and the, you know, the growth of those benefits throughout the process, rather than looking at them in terms of individual points. I mean, Rob is incredibly skilled at evaluation, so I'm sure it will kind of be captured, but that has been the sort of it's more a feeling than a kind of understanding and a thought. You know, the spirit of co-production has been embedded and adhered to in all interactions across all levels, I would say. Never perfectly, never, you know, from an idealistic point of view, but I think going back to that earlier point I made about being true and honest, I think that's really contributed to the success of these programs.
Thanks, Dan. Rob, any final comments?
I think so. The most interesting part to me is that now that you have the experience of doing such a thing, us as professionals, it means that we have the confidence to keep pushing this, that any position we hold in the next few years or the next few decades, we will be able to stand up and say, yeah, we've run something like this before, and we absolutely think that this is a viable path that we can promote, that we can run with confidence, that we can manage, and that we can demonstrate how to achieve those operational, those intrinsic benefits, and we can get this done for you. So recommendations for people listening: if you throw yourself at it and you really believe in it, then that first time it's going to be weird, it's going to be scary, and it might even be uncomfortable. But after you run an entire program like this, even if it's just for a year or two, you get so much more confidence around co-production. You get so much more confidence around interacting with people. And the second benefit really is, the second comment is how refreshing it is to actually work with people at ground level when you're typically a back office bureaucrat. And a lot of these service managers, a lot of the program managers or department heads, they will work in the office, they will do their 9 to 5s. They don't work on street level, they don't work with clients or service users on a daily basis. But interacting with people who have real motivations and real experiences and real stories is a way to pull us back into that story, is a way to pull us back into that method of why we're doing this job. And it gives us the exposure that we need and the motivation we need to keep on with programs like this. So yes, I'd encourage anyone that's listening to really take a chance. Run it on a smaller budget if you're not very confident at the first, but after a year or two, however long you need, it will certainly give you the confidence to roll out programs like this and see all of those benefits rolling in.
Amazing. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, really good points. And yeah, we just thank you for your work, your passion, your dedication to this project has been really amazing. And yeah, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Just do something rather than nothing. Co-production, you have to start somewhere, don't you? And to do it well, like we say, it takes time, it takes a lot of commitment, it takes a lot of passion, but the results are worth it. But great, thank you both so much.
You've been listening to Capital Connections. Capital is an independent peer-led charity working across Sussex to amplify lived experience, strengthen peer support, and influence how services are designed and delivered. If this conversation resonated with you, you can share this episode, follow or subscribe to the podcast, visit our website to learn more about our work, or get involved in future conversations. We're always looking to hear from people with lived experience, people committed to co-production, and others who want to do things differently. Connection starts with voice, and voice leads to change. Thank you for listening.